Hello, 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 hello. Good afternoon, everyone. And for those who are joining us, come on in, come on in. Good afternoon. Welcome to the first ever International Coastal Cleanup webinar, a Bag A Bokkle, that's what we wanted to call it. And it's being delivered by the Jamaica Environment Trust. Now, I'm your host, Rush Cam, and I'm super excited to be here. If you know anything about me, you know that I've been connected by the hip to Jet from high school days, being a part of coastal cleanups. And so it is very important to me that I'm serving here today as your host and moderator. We'd like to acknowledge the Tourism Enhancement Fund, the Ocean Conservancy, ICC coordinators and members of the media, and the JET members. And a special welcome to you guys joining us from Facebook and YouTube. Persons who are joining us on Facebook and YouTube, you are a part of the conversation. So if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you have any queries, be sure to put them in the question box. We have someone who is directly looking for questions from you, and hopefully our presenters will answer. Now we're talking about presenters, we're talking about why we're here. Today we'll be here to hear from three persons, three presentations. First, we'll have a presentation on the data collected during the ICC 2021 activities. Those of you who don't know, we had a full COVID-safe, COVID-friendly international coastal cleanup, which I had the pleasure of being a part of. And so we're going to hear about the data because ultimately, as Lauren would say to you, and Lauren is a part of the JET team, this is a data collection exercise. And then we're going to hear about ICC in the Caribbean. What differences and similarities are we seeing in the garbage collected on different coastlines? That's important because we get to contextualize what is happening. So on this coastline, we're seeing more plastic bottles versus this coastline, we're seeing more clothes, we're seeing all of those things. What is happening? So it helps us to put that in context. And lastly, we'll hear about the impact of the plastic ban in Jamaica. And for those of you who have been under a rock, the plastic ban in Jamaica was implemented in 2019. And so we want sort of like an update. How has it impacted us and what can we do with that information? Now, JET has been doing amazing work, international cleanups, collecting data, especially along Palisados, everyone knows, for such a long time. And so before we begin, JET's CEO, Teresa Rodriguez Moody, someone I've had the pleasure of meeting and I really enjoy working with her. She will now talk to us a little bit about ICC over the years and what they've been up to. Teresa?
Thank you, Roshcam. In 2021, the Jamaica Environment Trust was a national coordinator for the 28th Annual International Coastal Cleanup Activities in Jamaica. And the Tourism Enhancement Fund has funded Jamaica's ICC activities, and JET has been national coordinator since 2008. The Ocean Conservancy joined TEF to support ICC 2021. ICC is an international event started in 1985 by the Ocean Conservancy in Texas, US. It is typically celebrated on the third Saturday in September, involving over 1 million volunteers heading to the coast to conduct cleanups across the world. The COVID-19 pandemic significantly impacted the staging of ICC in 2020 and 2021. But Lauren will speak more about the results of ICC 2021. As national coordinator of Jamaica's ICC activities, JET works with the Ocean Conservancy to coordinate activities on a local scale with the help of many different partners from across the island. Unfortunately, JET has not been able to host its annual flagship cleanup at the Palisados Go-Kart that typically attracts over 2,000 volunteers. And this is primarily due to the restrictions placed on public gatherings due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We were able to host smaller cleanups in Kingston during the ICC season. Since JET became national ICC coordinators in Jamaica, the event has grown from 1,700 volunteers in 2008 to over 12,400 in 2019. Each year, more persons come out, more groups coordinate their own cleanups, and more trash is collected. Jamaica placed 10th within the top 25 participating countries for 2019. And this is a big accomplishment for such a small island. The combined efforts of over 12,400 volunteers in 2019 from 121 groups across 182 cleanup sites resulted in the collection of garbage weighing over 146,000 pounds. Together, we surpassed the goal set by JET in 2015 of attracting 10,000 volunteers. In 2020, despite the pandemic, JET had the participation of 338 volunteers from 23 dedicated groups, conducting 28 cleanups at 25 sites across the island. These groups were able to collect almost 600 bags of garbage, weighing over 8,300 pounds from ICC 2020 cleanup sites. We appreciate the groups that participated despite the ever-changing COVID-19 protocols and restrictions. An important thing to note about this program is that volunteers not only pick up trash, they also collect data on what they pick up. Data is important because it identifies the activities and general sources of pollution. It can be used for pollution prevention efforts, can be used to influence legislation, and promotes public awareness and education. 2019 saw the implementation of the ban on certain single-use plastic food packaging, including plastic straws and plastic bags. And in 2020, styrofoam food packaging was also banned. There was a 33% decrease in the number of plastic straws collected in 2019 as compared to 2018. But otherwise, there was no significant difference in other single-use plastic items, according to the data collected in 2019. In 2020, we were unable to collect the volume of garbage needed for comparison to the data collected in 2019. However, Lauren will share more about the impact of the plastic ban on data collected in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. No, I was writing down some of the information, and it's really, really, really interesting to me that in 2019 and 2020, we collected over about 146,000 pounds of garbage. You know, I did some research. I Googled it quick. That is like the weight of almost 40 cars. And the fact that even in the midst of a pandemic and what we would call unprecedented times, the fact that we still had groups coming out in their numbers, even though they were, socially distanced, the fact that we could collect 8,300 pounds of garbage, even though we are in the midst of a pandemic, is a great indicator to me that we care, right? And so that 12,400 that we saw in 2019, I am sure that in 2022, fingers crossed, we could double that or triple that, because we have people who genuinely are interested in seeing Jamaica clean. Yes, cleanups are important. And since we made the mess and we need to clean it up, we have to keep the island clean. So this was the theme for International Coastal Cleanup 2021, keep the island clean. And Teresa made mention of Lauren. I've made mention of Lauren before. And so I'm going to invite Lauren Creary, Program Director of JET, to present the ICC 2021 National Summary Report, give us some insights on the data, the changes in data all across the years of conducting ICC. And let's hear from her. Lauren?
Thank you, Rashkam, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to be speaking about the ICC National Summer Report, what the data is showing us, and what that means for the future. So each year for ICC cleanup activities across the island, volunteers not only remove thousands of pounds of garbage from our coastlines before they can make their way to the ocean, but they also collect information on what garbage is being removed. If you've ever participated in any cleanup activity, whether ICC or otherwise, you know that it is not an easy task to be collecting data while also trying to remove all of this garbage that is on our coastlines. So we once again want to thank the volunteers who tirelessly and diligently collect data during these cleanup activities. So we've had a few changes to ICC since COVID-19 all started. So cleanups were held in October and November of 2021 instead of September. So ICC is normally held on the third Saturday in September, which would have been the 18th last year, but that was not possible due to a spike in COVID cases. We've also had to limit cleanups to 15 people or less. And this is just to try and keep everyone safe and also follow government protocol. So smaller cleanups were hosted, and each group was also asked to assign a COVID protocol monitor to ensure that people were sanitizing their hands, wearing their masks, social distancing, and so on. So let's move into the participation statistics here. So in 2021, we saw a significant reduction in the number of volunteers that could participate, and naturally that led to less garbage being collected. But I think we are on our way back to our regular numbers. So we had an increase in participation in 2021 over 2020. And with a great deal of uncertainty, it was a little difficult for people to plan cleanups, but it went off successfully. So from the lessons that we learned in 2020, in 2021, we were able to have 1,675 volunteers from 87 groups, and they collected 3,179 bags of garbage. And all of that garbage weighed over 37,000 pounds. And this was collected from 83 sites across the island. And some people went back to sites over and over. So there were actually 112 cleanups that took place for ICC. So thanks again to our volunteers. So the different types of cleanups that we have, we did both on land and underwater cleanups. It's very important to also try and target collecting the garbage underwater. The garbage flows down through gullies, and it does wash up on our coastlines, especially in areas such as the Kingston Harbor, but garbage also gets trapped underwater, so it is good to target there as well. So we had 7 underwater cleanups and 105 on land cleanups. And we can see the parishes here that these cleanups took place. We had the most cleanups happening in Kingston and St. Andrew, and then there was a tie for second with St. Catherine and Westmoreland. We only had 1 cleanup in Hanover, but we would love to see more cleanups taking place in Hanover next year. So now let's look at the data. So you have the top 10 items that were collected in ICC 2021. So for the 14th year in a row, plastic beverage bottles are the #1 collected items from our coastlines. Not only are they #1, but they make up over 50% of the garbage that was collected at all cleanups. So the remaining top 10 items are also other types of single-use plastic. So it's important to note the sources of garbage. Most of this garbage is not left behind by users of beaches, but it is garbage that is not disposed of properly, whether it's thrown down on the street as litter, dumped in the gullies, some illegal dumping or littering. And when it rains, all of this washes down through the waterways, through the drains, and ends up in or on our coastlines. And so it is very important to note that the garbage that you're seeing is not always as a result of the people who are using that beach. So we're going to do a little comparison here and see what the data shows, especially in relation to the plastic ban. We will have someone later presenting more about the plastic ban, what items were banned, the timeline and the impacts and so on. But since the implementation of the plastic ban in Jamaica, we have seen some changes in the data. The most significant change that we've noticed is the number of plastic straws that have been collected. So in 2018, over 11,000 straws were collected, and this was before the ban was implemented. We did see a reduction in 2019 by about 33%, but now in 2020, we have seen a reduction by 142%, and a little over 1,300 straws were collected. So that is a big success, getting that small amount of, or that small plastic item, which does cause a lot of issues with marine animals, getting that off our coastlines and out of the ocean. So there's also been a reduction in the amount of polystyrene or styrofoam products that are being collected from our beaches. So in 2021, for the first time, no foam products were listed in the top 10 collected items. So these include plates, cups, food containers, and also small styrofoam pieces. So that is another winner for the plastic ban. Another first, however, is that other plastic food takeaway containers are now featured in the top 10. So these are not styrofoam, but they are polypropylene containers. This is another type of plastic, and they're also non-biodegradable and non-recyclable. So these types of containers have been seen on the market replacing styrofoam, and we are concerned that this is now featured in the top 10. So this is just what the National Summary Report looks like, and it will be shared on JET social media pages and the JET website. The data shows us each year how we impact the environment, and it is important to note that in addition to changes in regulations and changes to legislation, we can all make small changes to reduce our impact. So reducing our use of single-use plastics. We see that this is what is making up the majority of the top 10 items year to year. So if we can reduce our use of single-use plastics, this will make a big impact. So I want to thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, you can pose them in the comments and they will be addressed in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I will say that I am very, very, very interested in the findings that Lauren kind of gave us a while ago. But before I kind of give my view, before I introduce the next person, thank you so much, and big up to all the volunteers who have ever participated in ICC activities. JET, I am sure, recognizes all the partners and volunteers that participate every year. If you know anything about the cleanup, you know it doesn't happen in the night. And so to come out in the hot sun and doing all of this just to give back to your country and to be a part and give back to the environment, remarkable. And without you, the persons who volunteer and the groups and all of that put this together, it would not be possible. And so I am sure that JET shares the sentiment in thanking you for being a part of it. Now, as Lauren said, we had some wins, no foam products. Yay. I mean, when the plastic ban was introduced, Jamaicans couldn't envision or even fathom the fact that we could live a life without using plastic straws, foam products, and so on. And so we're very, very happy for that. It looks like it's working and it makes sense. So to give you a little more background, JET is the national coordinator of ICC, but the persons at Ocean Conservancy, they coordinate the ICC around the world with the help of the local partners like JET. So it's sort of like a collaboration between JET ICC Ocean Conservancy makes it happen. So Sarah will now share some information on the data collected at the cleanups within the Caribbean and internationally. Everybody is like, who is Sarah? Who is Sarah? Now let me tell you a little bit about Sarah. Sarah Kohler serves as the outreach manager for the International Coastal Cleanup under Ocean Conservancy's Trash Free Seas program. You hear that? That's a tongue twister. Trash Free Seas. She enjoys working with a fantastic network of beach and water cleanup organizers worldwide, along with passionate educators and individuals who take action on the issues in their own communities. Of course, she manages the creation and distribution of education and outreach materials for action-based solutions, and she maintains Ocean Conservancy's online ocean trash database. Because Sarah has all of this experience, we know that Sarah holds a bachelor's degree in bio and environmental studies, and she has been with the Ocean Conservancy for 7 years. And because COVID, 2020 and 2021, that's a lifetime. I call it 14 years. So she's had the pleasure of representing the Trash Free Seas program at a number of local, state, and national marine debris meetings and conferences. So I am very, very happy to introduce our next speaker, Sarah Kola, who is from Ocean Conservancy and will speak on Caribbean data trends. Sarah.
Hello, thank you, Rushcam. 1 minute, I'm just sharing my screen. Hopefully, can you see my PowerPoint slides? Or do you see everything? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm still seeing you.
How about now?
Not yet. While Sarah sets up, we just want to acknowledge again our partners. Thank you so much to our partners from Tourism Enhancement Fund, the Ocean Conservancy, the ICC coordinators. Thank you so much for being here, members of the media, and of course, JET members. And we see your questions coming in on Facebook, and we would just like to remind you that questions will be answered momentarily as we do our panel discussion at the end. And you can also send your questions, persons who are a part of the YouTube community. All right, so do we have Sarah? Is Sarah back?
I'm here. Are you able to see my window now with a slide with the beautiful ocean photo, or do you just see me?
I'm seeing you in your beautiful Ocean Conservancy shirt.
Oh goodness. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm trying. I think I'm sharing the right window. But let me try one more thing really quick. Sorry, Rushcam.
Okay, no problem. And I would just like to remind you guys of some of the info that we found out. We found out that in 2019 and 2020, over 150,000 pounds of garbage were collected. Based on Lauren's presentation just now, we saw a complete or almost 100% decrease in our foam products, and we see where plastic straws are no longer high on the list of items that we're finding because of the replacement with paper straws. Again, at the top of the list, we have single-use plastics. So what is that now? Plastic bottle juice and all of those things. We see where that is still a major contributor to our garbage in the coastal cleanups. But more importantly, the coastal cleanup is not for us to just come out in the day and take up garbage and say, yeah, we take up garbage, yeah. No, but it is a data collection exercise, and so we're super happy for that. Let's see if Lauren can share screen for us as we hear from Sarah from Ocean Conservancy on the Caribbean trends.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Lauren. Lauren to the rescue. And thank you, RushCam, for your patience with me. I apologize. I'm less familiar with this platform and thought I had it figured out, but alas, we're 2 years into this pandemic and we're still, at least I'm still having technical issues. So thank you all for your patience. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And Lauren, I'll just say next slide, please, when we're ready to click along. So hi, everyone. As RushCam said, I'm Sarah Kohler. I'm with Ocean Conservancy. We're a nonprofit, non-governmental organization that's based in Washington, D.C., United States. That's kind of where I'm joining you from a very rainy and kind of cold Washington, D.C. And we do work primarily in the United States on the major threats that face our ocean and our coastal waters. But I will say I'm in a very lucky role in that I have the honor of working on the International Coastal Cleanup, which by name is international in scope, and much of that trash-free seas program, that tongue twister of a program, much of that is growing rapidly, and I have many colleagues who do a lot of work in the international space as well. All of it really supported by the International Coastal Cleanup and the 36 years and running tradition of this movement. So honored to be with you today. Next slide, please. And I think this first one is just a quick overview of just the mission of our program. Yeah, here we go. This might look like a familiar scene to a number of you. We do work with and try to empower volunteer scientists and community scientists around the globe to take action for their coastlines, for their waterways. They might not even live anywhere near the ocean. You all are lucky to have the ocean right in your backyard, but we do work with a number of volunteer groups and organizations who are really inland as well. And we work on cleanups of all different shapes and sizes, from underwater scuba diving cleanups to cleanups by watercraft, which Lauren had referred to earlier. And then a number of them, a good portion, just on foot, good old fashioned getting out, walking the beach and the shoreline, and removing the harmful debris that's out there. And all of this work sort of is the backbone and catalyzes the rest of the work that my program is able to do. So I'll get into that a little bit more. Next slide, please. There we are. All right, so we're talking about the International Coastal Cleanup. It's a mouthful, so I'm just going to call it the ICC from now on. This is an event that, as you heard from Teresa earlier, and you've heard from Lauren and even RushCam too, it is this beautiful global movement that's now 36 years in the making. It does take place on or around the third Saturday in September. That's kind of the traditional ICC day. But as Lauren alluded to with the 2021 ICC in Jamaica, really now it's more of a season, and we encourage volunteers, individuals, groups to get out and do the cleanups when it makes sense for them, right? We have national holidays, religious holidays, global, weather events, hurricane season that really impacts when groups can go out and do their events. And really what Ocean Conservancy does is we try to act as that main resource hub, and making sure that we work with all of our incredible partners around the world, JET being that main partner in Jamaica for a number of years now. Think of that kind of same relationship, but in 155 plus countries, and then a lot of different US states as well. We maintain those relationships and make sure that we are creating relevant and scientifically sound resources for this network so that we can have a unified voice every year. It's tricky to find a theme that works for everyone, but I think Na Daddy Up Jamaica might be the favorite that I've heard so far. And I believe my director was able to actually come join you all at a cleanup gosh, it must have been in 2017 or 2016 at this point. But she, only had amazing things to tell us when she returned about how awesome the event was there. And so we kind of act as this information hub, not only to get the resources out before the big events, but then afterwards, that's kind of where I come in. I'm kind of the data person. I'm the numbers nerd, and I get really excited about all of this incredible data that volunteers work hard to collect. Lauren had mentioned this before too. The data are vitally important. They help drive all of this policy and this positive policy change that we've seen. They help drive the science. We're still trying to wrap our heads around, where does all this plastic pollution go? How is it moving in ocean currents? How is it, crossing country borders and ending up on different shores, ending up in the atmosphere, at the depths in the bottom of the ocean, and everywhere in between? So it's still kind of a new science if you think about it. So the data collected by volunteers across the world through the International Coastal Cleanup, they're really helping us understand that science. Next slide, please. So you might ask, how are volunteers collecting this data? Maybe you're interested in the ICC, but you have never joined an event before. We've talked a little bit about data collection, and you'll see, yeah, there's one photo here. This is just a sampling of some of the images that our team is lucky enough to receive every year after the International Coastal Cleanup, just from partners around the world. These are some images specifically from the Caribbean region. I think one from Jamaica is in the top right, with some very happy celebratory volunteers, even in the heat. Next slide, please. But then what all these volunteers do on top of getting out and giving their time, usually it's a Saturday morning or a whole day, they actually collect data on what's found. And that helps us get those top 10 lists that you just saw from Lauren and others. And they help us understand, is this policy working? What is the decrease in a certain item being found? So all that information historically has been tracked on paper volunteer data cards. And Ocean Conservancy creates these. We've worked over the years to, it used to be a big long list of about 100 items. Now we've kind of figured out there's a sweet spot there to not really burden the volunteer by tracking everything, but to help them find, what are the most common items that we're finding on beaches, really with a focus on plastic and with a focus on single-use consumer items. Since we are finding a lot of those and there is action, we understand that there is action in the policy space that we can play when we have these numbers as evidence to kind of back our claims. So the data card will always exist, but we're really excited to move kind of into the 21st century. And we have an app now too. It's called CleanSwell. It's up there on the screen. It's free to download. It's available in about 7 different languages right now. And whatever way volunteers want to collect data, we're happy to have it. I work closely with Lauren and her team. Even if data come in from, someone took a picture of a bag of trash that they collected on their own, we can utilize that information, right? So we do everything we can to get all that information onto an online database. And that's a big part of my job, is managing this database that we call Tides. It's open access to anyone, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I'll just say, next slide, please. So the data collection is really big. I think this next slide just, has a little bit more information about that CleanSwell app that I mentioned. You'll see there right in the middle, there's a collection screen, and all you do is you group up. Maybe you have one person that they can't touch the trash, or maybe they're, for physical reasons, they're not able to kind of do that manual labor. They can be a data recorder. It's a great job for a person in a small team to follow along, and just literally they just tap those icons on the screen and it keeps a tally for you. So really neat tool. We worked with a lot of partners, and we're always seeking out guidance from partners in the global network on, what do you need from an app? Well, it's got to work in remote locations. It's got to work without cellular service, and it's got to be easy for volunteers to use. So we take all that feedback into mind, and we're always updating. Like, we're constantly working on making this as easy to use and fun to use as possible. So next slide, please. And it can be used year round. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but it's really popular, obviously, around cleanups in September, October, and November, right around the ICC season. Here, a few more pictures. I think that center bottom one, yep, is from Jet. And then just to further kind of build out on Lauren's point and take that policy question a little broader, here are some bulleted examples of how we've seen or we've heard of ICC data being used for policy change. So really, we've seen it from everything from a very local, like stretch of beach smoking ban, all the way to national policies and even international conventions, such as there's a convention on what sort of items can and cannot be discarded off of vessels. And even ICC data were referred to like in the creation of that international treaty. So it's pretty cool how the numbers can be useful on a number of different geographic scales. Lauren mentioned the bans in Jamaica, the recent bans. I wasn't aware of the polystyrene in 2020. That's very exciting to have this progress being made even amidst a global pandemic. It just speaks to how important those numbers are that volunteers have collected over the years, and how we know, with the pandemic, we're gonna see a lot of that single-use plastic increase again. We're gonna see that takeout food, those containers and some of those items become more prevalent. Just, there's always a little bit of a delay, right? We see it in our waterways and on our shorelines a year, a couple years, 5 years down the road. So anything that we can do to have that historic ICC data drive policy change now, the better. So if you want more details on this, we have, like I mentioned, I have colleagues who work specifically in the international policy space, and they can share a little bit more information on that front. Happy to connect anyone after the webinar. I actually did just work on a big compilation of data from the entire Caribbean large and marine ecosystem that went towards this paper that you see here on this next slide. Happy to share those data, and that's really like summary data for the entire Caribbean region, all of the nations there that kind of touch the larger marine ecosystem of the Caribbean. But then on the right here, just a little sampling of, I just wanted to pull some of Jamaica's numbers from the last 5 years, just from our database. And as Lauren mentioned, plastic beverage bottles right up there in the top, much more so than some of the other items, but definitely promising, right? That's an item that we could work towards circularity on and getting some recycling schemes in place. And then just noting the incredible effort of 90,000 plus volunteers in the country over the last 5 years, even the last 2 years being a pandemic, is just fantastic. So again, I can't thank volunteers enough. If you've come out to the ICC before, we really appreciate your effort, and it's in action every day through the data and the database. Next slide, please. I think I'd have just a couple more. Yeah, and then the data here, there's a lot going on here, but I did just want to mention that the data inspires some education and outreach work as well. Rushcam did mention that is kind of what I love to see. I like to see youths, children's eyes light up when they're at a cleanup and they see the items that they're collecting and they're like, oh, this is a straw. I could probably do without a plastic straw. So we do create a number of outreach resources that are fun, they're colorful, they're family friendly. If you're interested, I think I put our website there. And then we do even have resources for if people want to dive deeper into where is this trash coming from, and looking at sources such as different brands, because we do work with some of these companies who know that their items are part of the problem, and we're working with them to kind of bring them along in the solution set instead of kind of pointing the finger of blame and then them kind of being like, well, what do we do here? So Ocean Conservancy is a big fan of bringing those companies along and helping them either figure out circularity for the end of life of their products, or other alternative materials or reusable options for their products wherever possible. Next slide, please. And I'm happy to share more info. I know we have the panel too, so happy to chat about any of these items in a few moments. And I think I've kind of alluded to all of this, but now where our team is really thinking and where we're trying to kind of shift the narrative for the international coastal cleanup is well, what do we do with all this debris collected? There's got to be a better way, right? Like, we don't want to keep cleaning for generations and generations. We want our coastlines to be beautiful for the next generation. And we want to, the solutions are out there. We just kind of need to figure out what works for each location. It's going to be different for every nation, for every community. But just here's kind of a list of some of the topics where we're kind of exploring, what can be done so that we're reducing and stopping ocean trash in the first place. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and then finally, I just want to give a hats off to, again, the incredible network that I get to work with of country and state partners, JET being a, exemplary partner. This photo in the top was the last time pre-pandemic that we were able to gather, and this is all of the partners, the leaders of the ICC in the Caribbean region. We were able to get together, I believe, in 2017, and it was just so amazing to have that networking, be able to bounce ideas off of one another, because of course within regions too, partners do kind of share a lot of the same challenges when it comes to cleanups and plastic pollution. But for now, we're doing the video thing. We're doing the virtual meetings until it's safe for us to get together. But I did just want to say a big thank you to JET for hosting us and inviting me to be a part of this. And again, to all ICC volunteers in Jamaica, if you've ever gone out to an event, or if you're ever even just thinking about going to a cleanup, I think they're a lot of fun, but I might be a little biased. Thank you all. Yeah, here's my contact information, and I appreciate being invited to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you. And thank you to the Ocean Conservancy for spearheading this work. I was really shook at the number of volunteers and the proportion of trash. But what you said, which is super important to me, is the fact that trends can inform policy. The numbers don't lie. So when you have the numbers, you use those numbers to influence the private sector, use those numbers to influence the government and to influence like the policies that we have. And education is key. I remember when I volunteered or worked with JET across Jamaica, going to different supermarkets and handing out straws, like these kinds of straws and like reusable cups and bags. And I was so like shook at how Jamaican people just didn't have the information. It wasn't because of not wanting to be environmentally aware, but information and education is key. And so thank you so much, Ocean Conservancy, and thank you to JET. And as was said by Sarah, if you have any questions, you can surely reach out to her. For those who are just joining us, you're a little late, but thank you for joining us. Welcome. We are at the International Coastal Cleanup webinar hosted by JET. We're kind of trying to figure out what information we have from our most recent coastal cleanups and how we can transform that into like a greater conversation around policy. So we have a panel discussion later on in the program. We can address your questions. We see questions here from YouTube and from Facebook, but we have someone else who will give us a different perspective, one that I am very interested in hearing. As was mentioned by Sarah and Teresa, I've mentioned it as well. This is a data collection exercise. And so when you collect the data and it informs policy and legislation, we want to know how it really does and what steps have been taken and if any progress has been made in informing such policy and legislation. And so the perfect person to hear from is Danielle Andrade Goff. She will take us through the plastic ban in Jamaica and its impacts. Now, who is Danielle? Why do we need to hear from Danielle? I will tell you why. Danielle is a partner in Goff Law, and she was called to the bar in 2005. She has also served as a consultant to several organizations, including the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPA, the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Jamaica Environment Trust. She was the recipient of a British Evening Scholarship in 2009 and has a master's degree in environmental law from Queen Mary University of London. That means when we all bring it together, her expertise is international, not international, well, it could be international environmental law, but environmental law and policy, real estate conveyancing, wills, and so on and so forth. But more importantly, right now, we want to hear about the policy, legislation, plastic ban, and how does it all come together? So let's hear from Danielle.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jamaica Environment Trust, for inviting me to give this presentation on the plastic ban in Jamaica. And thank you, Rushcam, for introducing me. I'm very happy to talk about the plastic ban, the legislation that introduced it some 2 years ago, and what has been the impact so far of this ban. So here's a bit of an overview of the legislation regarding the plastic ban. It was actually 2 ministerial orders that were passed in 2018. There's a Natural Resources Conservation Plastic Packaging Materials Prohibition Order, which really sought to prohibit the manufacture and commercial use of banned plastics. And then on the other side, the Trade Plastic Packaging Materials Prohibition Order of 2018 was meant to restrict the importation of these banned materials. And so what you have is certain agencies, the National Environment and Planning Agency that's responsible for the NRCA order, and then you had the trade authorities, including Customs Authority, working with the Bureau of Standards of Jamaica and other authorities to inspect importations of plastic material and do certain testing to confirm the types of material used for some of these plastics. Interesting data, as at 2020, NEPA had indicated that they had served over 370 compliance audit notices on individual companies, partnerships, sole traders in relation to breaches of the NRCA plastic packaging prohibition order. So there has been some work done to enforce these orders. Now, this gives an overview of the timeline for the plastic ban, because it wasn't done all at one time. It was sort of done in a phased, implemented way. So in 2019 to 2020, the ban extended to single-use plastic bags that were at 24 inches by 24 inches in size or less, and 1.2 milliliters thick. It also applied to styrofoam packaging, styrofoam food and beverage containers, as well as single-use drinking straws made of plastic. And then in 2021, the order brought into effect other types of plastic, such as single-use drinking straws for juice boxes or drink pouches, as well as same type of single-use plastic bags, but of a greater thickness, 2.5 milliliters thick. It's interesting to note that, so the 2 different orders, the penalties are different. So for the importation of these banned plastics under the trade legislation, the penalties are much higher. You can actually be fined up to $2 million under that act for breaching that order. Whereas under the NRCA order, which related to the local manufacture and distribution of these banned plastics, the maximum fine is only $50,000. So the plastic ban did not apply to all types of plastics. The orders actually specify some types of plastic that are exempt. So, for example, plastic materials that are used for public health and food safety packaging, such as for use with raw meat, eggs, flour, sugar, rice, baked goods, packaging for personal effects that are used in your luggage while you're traveling, drinking straws for persons with disabilities, those materials that were imported before January 1st, 2019, which is when it came into effect. And also if approval had been obtained from the relevant minister, or if those materials had been imported and distributed by the Ministry of Health, they were also specifically exempt under the legislation. Now, what has been the impact of the plastic ban? So we've seen a reduction in straws and polystyrene, that's a styrofoam, that has been collected. There has been an introduction and use of alternatives. For example, and this is probably the most common one that people are familiar with, is the use of alternative shopping bags. We're also seeing where plastic straws have now been replaced by paper and metal straws, and these are now widely and generally accepted. I should note, and this probably was mentioned before in the previous presentation, but you can see in the ICC data that there's also been this shift in the types and the composition of marine litter that has been collected since before the ban and then to date. So in 2019, which is when that ban was first introduced, you see where plastic bags was like the top 4 type of marine litter that was collected. And now in 2021, it's a top 7. So you're seeing that impact, that reduction coming out in that data. Similarly, with styrofoam, foam pieces was the top 3 material in 2019, and now it's the top 5 marine litter that's collected. But we're still seeing some challenges though with our attempts to control and to limit and reduce plastic consumption and litter in Jamaica. There's still some retail and wholesale outlets and restaurants that will distribute plastic goods with the purchase of goods, and you're seeing that there are some larger single-use plastic bags that are in use. So things that are over that 24 by 24 inch, measurement that the ban applies to, you're seeing bags being produced in a larger size. And the ban obviously does not capture those. Then you're also seeing the use of other types of plastic containers as a substitute for styrofoam food containers, such as the image on the right there. And many of you would have been familiar with these types of food takeaway containers. Well, what many people have complained about, that there are issues with alternative paper products. People complain about quality, that is, there's leakage. People complain about the cost. Paper-based products are sometimes 3 to 8 times the cost of styrofoam products. People complain about also their ability to handle heat and other factors. And so that's why we're seeing why some persons are unwilling to make the shift from plastic entirely to paper and other types of alternative material. Another thing that the ban did result in is the loss of some jobs. We did have the closure of a styrofoam manufacturing operation in Jamaica, which resulted in the loss of jobs. I believe the private sector organization of Jamaica estimated it was over 100 persons who were made redundant as a result of the closure of that plant. Now, there's some disadvantages also of the ban. The ban does not extend to certain single-use plastics, such as plastic cutlery. In 2019, plastic cutlery was plastic cutlery, cups and plates. I think before was top 7 item that was collected. Now it's a top 3 item that is being collected. The ban also doesn't prevent the importation, distribution, and sale of food containers made from plastic. And we've seen that increase in the collection in the ICC data. So whereas before it never appeared in the data in 2019 as a type of waste that was collected, Now we're seeing it's in among the top 10 that's being collected. And then, of course, one of the main problems that we have, as you can see from the ICC data, is the prevalence of plastic bottles among the marine litter, and the ban does not extend to plastic bottles. Now, in 2020, NEPA commissioned and conducted a regulatory impact assessment to look at some future policy options for dealing with marine litter. And I just wanted to briefly talk about some of those possible future policy options. So, how do we deal with plastic bottles? One of the proposed options is to have a deposit refund scheme coupled with recycling. This would be voluntary, but then a recommendation was made to revisit this after 5 years of implementation to assess the effectiveness and determine if legislation should be considered to give effect to that deposit refund scheme. And then how do we look at regulating some of the other types of plastic that the ban does not address? These include your cutlery, disposable cups, and then the other types of plastic bags, lids and so on. In Jamaica, only certain products made from paper are duty-free. Other types of alternative materials that could replace your plastic food containers, such as bagasse or even cornstarch, they attract a 15% and 20% duty, import duty. And so these alternative products, they're already more costly to produce than their plastic counterparts. And the imposition of the duties also contributes to a higher cost, and it makes them less attractive to the average consumer. So one of the proposed policy options is to look at reducing the customs duty on the importation of some of these biodegradable alternatives. And then, of course, we would keep the existing regulations. I just wanted to say one thing briefly about the deposit refund scheme. So container deposit legislation is designed to reduce the litter and to capture plastic bottles for recycling by adding a refundable fee to the price of drinks and other items. So consumers, they pay a deposit on the plastic beverage containers on purchase, and they receive a refund for the return of those containers. Now, the essential element when you have legislation for this type of deposit refund scheme is making it a legal obligation for a manufacturer or bottler to accept the bottles and to refund the deposit. The legislation could also require either recycling or the final disposal of unused or unusable containers, and it would also mandate what should be done with unclaimed deposits. The legislation could even include a target for the percentage of manufactured bottles that need to be collected or recycled. What we do have in Jamaica, and some may be familiar with this, is a voluntary deposit refund scheme to target plastic bottles, PET and HDPE specifically, plastic bottles. This was something proposed by the private sector in 2018. They placed a tax on soda and plastic bottles, and there would be a self-imposed tax of $1 on every plastic bottle that's produced by the partners in this voluntary deposit refund scheme. There are roughly about 11 or so bottlers or manufacturers that had signed up to this scheme. I'm not sure if that number still pertains. And consumers could receive up to $50 per pound in plastic bottles. once they are deposited to Recycling Partners of Jamaica, which is a partner in this scheme. And Recycling Partners of Jamaica would then you carry out recycling operations. So the intention, of course, of this was to increase the amount of bottles that are recovered, plastic bottles that are recovered, to lessen the load that would be disposed of in our waste stream. The intention was to have a 65% recovery rate by 2023. Now, one of the disadvantages, of course, with this scheme is that it's voluntary. And it's not clear whether or not all bottlers, all manufacturers of bottlers have subscribed to this scheme fully, which is significant since it's voluntary. And also the fact that it's voluntary, the contributors are not legally bound to comply with the deposit refund scheme. So at any point in time, they would choose to end their participation. Enacting legislation for this scheme, of course, would bring more legal certainty. It would put a legal obligation on these bottlers to comply with this deposit refund scheme. I do believe that more marketing is needed to create public awareness about this, even though there has been an increase in plastic collection over time, over the period since this has started. It would be good if there was more public awareness, so we had greater participation in it. Some issues I think we need to resolve, and which the plastic ban, I think, is over and beyond what the plastic ban can do, or legislation in this capacity can do. We do have irregular and limited collection of waste island-wide. We have problems with waste management. We have poor attitudes and behavior towards littering. The management of our dump sites is poor. Example, Riverton, case in point. I don't really need to say much about that facility. We still don't have any sanitary landfills in Jamaica. And then we have an issue with enforcement. Enforcement needs to be improved. As I mentioned before, some of the penalties under some of these laws are very low in comparison to others. And we need to put adequate resources to ensure that we can enforce the plastic ban and our laws relating to littering. So we have more work to be done. And thank you. That was my presentation, and I welcome any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Wow. So, you know what was so interesting about Danielle's presentation is that, like, we have issues, we resolve the issues, and then there are issues that come with the resolve of those issues. Like, we always have to be, and we constantly have to be assessing where we're at, looking at the data, looking at the information that we have, and driving policy forward, because that is why policy that's implemented in 93 has to be resolved, has to be reinforced or redrafted or restated 5 years later. And then separate and apart from that, legislation is only a portion. Because as Daniel said, we have issues with waste management, we have issues with just culture and the poor attitude towards littering, as well as enforcement. So there's just so many different issues to be addressed. And thank you so much, Daniel. We will be hearing more from Daniel, because we're going to move now to our panel discussion. And I'd already introduced you to Sarah. I'd already introduced you to Daniel. And as well as Sarah and Daniel, we're going to be joined by Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody, who is CEO of JET. We also heard from her, but not for an extended period of time. So let me just tell you a little bit about her. Now, Dr. Rodriguez Moody joined JET as a CEO in July 2021. She has a PhD in geography from the University of the West Indies, Mona, and since 2021 has been leading JET's environmental advocacy and working on projects geared towards the protection of Jamaica's natural resources and public health. Prior to joining JET, Dr. Rodriguez Moody has worked as an environmental consultant on projects both locally and regionally. And so when she speaks and when she has her opinions that are backed by data, we know that it also is compounded by experience. And so I am very, very happy to hear from Dr. Rodriguez Moody, as well as Sarah and Daniel Andrade Goff. Okay, hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. You know, in 2022, we're having conversations that surround a simple issue, littering. It's essentially that all of this stems from that, right? Now, I noticed you said, Daniel, we have the issue of enforcement. Now, someone asked it on Facebook, and I am genuinely interested as well. Why are stores, or I'll ask their question and then I will add it. Why are stores still using styrofoam for food packaging when it has been banned? No, yes. But my follow-up question, which is really a bigger question, is what are the real, tangible ways of enforcement for those who breach the ban?
All right. So I believe when the ban was implemented, persons were given time to use what was within their inventory. However, as I think by now we shouldn't be seeing any styrofoam food containers. What I had alluded to in my presentation is that what we're seeing now is that instead of the styrofoam food containers, we're seeing these other types of plastic food containers, which I'm sure you've seen those as well with our restaurants, food takeaway places. So we're just seeing one bad replacing another bad. And I think that's one of the I don't know if you want to call it loopholes, or one of the things that I'm not sure that people anticipated would be an impact of the plastic ban. The penalty for persons who distribute those types of the styrofoam and other types of banned plastic in Jamaica is $50,000 if you manufacture it and distribute it in commercial quantities here as a maximum penalty. And the reason why under that legislation it's $50,000 is because it's a subsidiary order that was passed pursuant to the Parent Act. And the Parent Act is a 1991 law. That's the Natural Resources Conservation Act. And back then they set the maximum penalty as 50,000. So this law that comes under this Parent Act cannot be a greater penalty than the Parent Act unless we change that 1991 law.
So Daniel, I have a follow-up question. It's been 3 years since we had the ban on the plastic ban. Wow. Since we've heard about all these loopholes, is it time for us to go back to the drawing board to revise the ban to kind of close those gaps? Yes, and not how, but if you could suggest like 2 loopholes that are top priority to be closed right now. If you could go to tomorrow, Daniel. We know it's not at work, but if you could go tomorrow, what would it be? What would they be?
You know, you're putting me on the spot there.
I know.
So part of the regulatory impact assessment was to do a cost benefit analysis and to see what the feasibility was of implementing different types of options. And I think the choice between measures has to be based on the availability of alternatives to the ones that we're banning, the impact on the convenience for the consumer, because if people do not want to take up these alternatives, they will not work. The implementation feasibility, and the reduction potential. So there are many factors that come into play in deciding what type of option would be the best. And within all of this, there needs to be adequate stakeholder consultation with the private sector and other entities in order to ensure that whatever measure can be feasible. That being said, based on the data that Jet has presented, in my view, plastic bottles is one of the top things that we need to look at. Because of, because it is the greatest type of marine litter that we have. Now, the deposit refund scheme that has been going on, I believe it's only been going on for maybe 2 to 3 years or so. And in the regulatory impact assessment, we did say that we should give it 5 years, and then we could get proper data, give it a fair chance, and see whether we need legislation to support it. So I do think that we probably need to revisit the deposit refund scheme, evaluate it. I'm hoping that the type of monitoring of the progress and the way it's being implemented is being done, and that all the relevant authorities are working with the stakeholders in that monitoring of that process, so that we can have good data at the end of the day.
Wow. Excellent answer. It's not school's challenge, but truly, I like that answer, and I like the approach of research guiding policy, and let's talk to all the stakeholders. Let's look at it. But with the data that we have right now, it's very obvious what's at the top of our list. Wink, wink. Can I ask you, Sarah, from your observation of like what's been happening over the years, recently, have you seen any big policy changes, whether regionally, internationally, based on the ICC data that you've seen?
Yeah, that's a big one. I could talk for a while on that, but to keep it short, we've seen a lot of, especially island nation partners, doing the banning of importing of foamed polystyrene plastics, and as well as the creation in nation. So there's been a lot of work in that. I think we actually just heard from our partner in Vanuatu about a pretty strict ban that they have on all single-use plastics, I believe, in Vanuatu. So that's been exciting to see, especially the polystyrene. It's the lower value, quote unquote, plastics that are really challenging. Things like film type food wrappers, think of like a candy bar wrapper or a chip bag. Those I think are especially difficult because those are considered low value plastics. And even if, there's not even an existing recycling scheme for those items at the moment. So we find a lot of partners, if recycling can be tackled on some of the other considered higher value items, such as aluminum cans, glass, and plastic beverage bottles, then they're left with, you're finding all of these food wrappers and these plastic beverage like sachets or pouches, if you will. So I feel like that's going to be kind of the next place where hopefully we'll have creative minds and innovation and technology that can help us in creating a circular economy for that type of plastic as well.
Thank you. And I like that you said we hope that there are creative minds who can do it, because even when we look at Jamaica, I just saw like sugarcane straws. I mean, once you give people like that framework within which to present products and ideas, I'm sure that we can see more. Thank you so much. Let me move to Teresa, Dr. Rodriguez Moody. We're talking about policy and data, but what about culturally? When you look at the campaign like No Dirty Up Jamaica, Keep Island Clean, all of those conversations, do you see where, from Jet's POV, do you see where it's been impactful? Do you see where changes have been made? Do you think that that sort of public education and awareness even makes sense? Is it useful? Is it important?
Thanks, Roshkam. I think I'll start with the last part of your last question. Is it important? Is it useful? If I were to think about how many times I have to tell my children, go and wash your hands. Remember, before you eat, wash your hands. You know, don't talk with food in your mouth. Even adults, you have to say this repeatedly. That's the thing about learning, changing of habits and so forth. Reinforcement, it needs repetition. If you're going to change habits, if you're going to learn something, it needs repetition. And so some people will argue that, you know, a public education awareness campaign about, garbage is not necessary, it's not important, it's a waste of time, and it doesn't reach everybody. No, that's correct. It won't reach everybody. But if you combine it with, working closely with communities and showing them and teaching them and providing them with different alternatives, as you said, as you mentioned, when you went on your roadshow and you spoke to people and you told them about the impacts and you showed these are some alternatives, sometimes people just don't know. Sometimes they just don't have the information. And so we have found that it has impacted. I mean, to this day, I think it was at the last ICC cleanup last year, we heard people singing the songs, and we haven't, it's not something that we've been promoting on the radios recently because of funding. But at the same time, it has struck. People have come up to me and said, that's one of the best things Jet ever did. This novelty of Jamaica, keep the island clean. And so it is important, and as is every kind of educational campaign, about changing of behavior, because this is a big thing. So you can remove the garbage, and you can put better measures in place for enforcement and so forth. But really, once we're looking at things like attitude, as well as in terms of the innovation, the production at source. But attitude is also very important. It's not just about not, it's about disposing it in a proper way. It's about maybe just not purchasing it in the first place. And so it's a combination of things, but you need that education to be informed. It's the first step to making a decision, to be informed. And so public education campaigns are very important in this fight against plastic pollution and just generally waste management issues.
Absolutely. Ignorance is not bliss. We like to say ignorance is bliss. It's not. And so for those of you who don't know the song, let me just give you a line. Oh, God, yeah. Keep the island clean, so clean. Dun, 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 dun. No dirty up Jamaica.
Jamaica.
Don't do it. So we have questions coming in from Facebook and YouTube, and we definitely want you guys to continue to send them. I think this is best answered by Dr. Rodriguez Moody. So you've collected the garbage at the International Coastal Cleanup. How is that garbage disposed of?
Okay, so usually our coordinators we help our coordinators, they're trained in terms of this entire process, not just about actually going out and collecting the data, but what happens to the garbage after. So usually we provide them with contact information. We work with NSWMA for the non-recyclable garbage. And then we also contact Recycling Partners of Jamaica and ask them to collect the recyclable garbage. And for Jamaica, it's just type 1 and type 2 plastic. So type 1 is like your soda bottles, and type 2 is like your dishwashing or your fabric softener bottles and that kind of thing. So we don't recycle all 6 types of plastic, only 2. And so, but we try to ensure that our coordinators and their volunteers package out the garbage separately so that it can be easily picked up by the different entities, by either NSWMA, or sometimes if it's a smaller cleanup, we have companies like GSS, and then and then for plastics or recyclables, we have RPJ coming to collect it.
So guys, it's a whole thing. Like there's a whole plan surrounding it. I thank you for the distinction between the 2 plastics, because I call one hard plastic and soft plastic. So thank you for that. I learned something new today. I have a question for Danielle. Daniel, you said that some persons are of the view that we should make the scheme mandatory, and then, some people think we should wait it out, see if it works. What is your view based on your understanding of the landscape, your understanding of how legislation and policy works in the Jamaican environmental framework? Do we give it time to see if there's a shift voluntarily, or do we push for it to be mandatory?
Right. Well, as I said before, it's only been going on in earnest for about 2 or 3 years. And I think it does take some time, especially because it's a voluntary initiative. So you're not going to see the immediate impacts that you would if it were like with the ban and it was legislated, where, there's an immediate ban to it, immediate stop to it, and there are penalties. The fact that it's a voluntary process and that private sector is willing to finance it, I think is positive. And it requires more time, I think, to see the effects, the positive effects of the implementation of it. The proposal was in the regulatory impact assessment was to give it 5 years. We still have probably another 2 years. I would love to see what the data looks like in the 2 years from ICC, and based on that and other information we have about how many bottlers and manufacturers have contributed to the scheme, how much have they contributed, what are some of the challenges that Recycling Partners of Jamaica may have in implementing and carrying out the recycling, and other sorts of issues that are the components that would make this work. And then analyzing all that information, we would see if legislation would assist the situation. So yeah, I think we should, give it a 2 more years and see what happens. I think that would also give us time to, if necessary, draft the appropriate legislation and policy, have consultations with the stakeholders on how we would implement it, so we don't rush into something that may have some unintended impacts
Absolutely.
that we did not anticipate.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Daniel, you're like a teacher. I'm like, yes, Daniel, thank you. Like, it's very clear and very comprehensive, I must say. From a legal perspective, thank you. I mean,
Thank you.
I don't know if it's because I, went to, law school, but so now I have a question for everyone. It's like a multiple choice. So I wrote it down. Ready? Which one is more important or most important to focus on as we try to improve Jamaica's waste management issues? There's no right answer, please. So just justify the answer. 1, stronger waste management laws and regulations. 2, better monitoring and enforcement. Or 3, more resources to collect the garbage. And Daniel, you cannot say all of the above. So, what do we need most importantly to focus on as we try to improve Jamaica's waste management? Stronger laws and regulations, better monitoring and enforcement, more resources to collect the garbage. Where do we need that big push right now, right away, tomorrow morning? Let's start with Sarah. You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So as the person on this panel with probably the least understanding least understanding of the solid waste challenges in Jamaica specifically, I will kind of answer from kind of a holistic or an international view of what we've kind of seen from other partners. And I would say, I mean, you said I can't say all of the above, so I will go with C, which is, I think, more resources and basically accessibility to even just proper landfill options for households, for businesses, for all of these entities that are creating the waste. We've heard from countless partners who, forget about even recycling, like they don't even have proper landfill and just a safe and contained place for this trash to go. So to that question earlier, I think by someone on the Facebook about, what happens to the trash that's collected, that is kind of the golden question that we've been trying to answer. And really for the ICC network, it spans the spectrum of like, there's not even a spot for trash to go, or maybe we do have some of these more advanced options of recycling and circularity and innovation. So in our minds, I think if we can help get partners who really don't even have access yet and households that don't even have access, I think that would be a really big, key place to start for many communities globally.
Brilliant. Thank you. Next up is Teresa. What's your answer?
Well, I wish I could say all of the above. I think it's one thing to have laws and regulations, but that's not, on its own, we've seen that in Jamaica, that doesn't work. It's not enough, right? I am leaning, can I just say a combination of BMC, a combination of better monitoring and enforcement,
yes.
and more resources. Definitely, that is, the resources is one of the major cries of MSWMA. And I think if we have an improvement in that aspect, similar to what Sarah has said, but also we need to have better monitoring and enforcement, because we see garbage, we see people discard of these things and lingering for days in the public, and there's not adequate, people don't bear the repercussions of littering. I don't know, Daniel, in terms of, has the Litter Act been revised? I believe at one time it was like $1 or something like that. Maybe that's the old legislation, but the fines to collect for illegally disposing of garbage is not strong enough either. So
thank you. I will just insert my answer because I'm now asking myself. When I was in high school, and just overall, have you ever noticed that if there's a garbage bin and the bin is full, people just walk with the garbage and just throw it anywhere, or they throw it on the top and then it spills over? So immediately, as you said, more resources. I was like, as soon as my high school got more bins, the school was clean. It's the strangest thing. Like, once we saw more bins in a closer proximity to each other along a pathway, for example, we saw where we were just like, all right, meh. So it's not that people don't want to dispose of their garbage properly. Well, sometimes they just really don't. But yeah, I think better resources would be my answer. What's your answer, Daniel?
Hi. So just a comment on what Teresa said. So we do have the Solid Waste Management Act that was passed in 2001, and there are high penalties under that for disposing of solid waste in public. So it's the legislation is not terrible. The problem, I agree with Teresa and with you, Rushcam, is the enforcement and the monitoring, as well as the resources. And one thing I will say, and this may not be something that contributes directly to marine litter, but the situation with Riverton brings another set of issues, public health concerns. And it's one of those things that we only think about it when there's a fire or there's a grave incident and crisis that occurs, and then we forget about it when the fire is out and we move on. But there are some issues like Riverton that are ingrained and systematic and just continue in Jamaica's life and landscape, and we really can't continue to accept these things as being okay. So I would love to see earnest resources, earnest political will taking on some of those challenges and putting resources to good use. That's it.
Thank you. We're seeing the questions coming from Facebook. I have a list here. The thing is that the questions are very complex and would require us like a deeper dive. Like each one of these questions could be a webinar, right? So we're talking about like the impact of litter on marine life in the reefs, and what percentage of our fish and had microplastic in their gut and all of those are huge questions, and we acknowledge them, and definitely the team from JET, I'm sure, will take the time out to address these questions. But I have a broad, not so broad question to ask as we wrap up. We're talking about the golden thread throughout this International Coastal Cleanup webinar has been plastic. Whether it's the banned plastic, the plastic with the bleach bottle, the soda bottles, the straws. When we think about it, right, is there really an alternative to producing plastic, to producing so much plastic? Like, if we're being really honest, is there an alternative to producing so much plastic? It's not so much a legal question, but I would love to hear from you as well, Daniel. But it's a question posed to everyone. So we're gonna hear from like an international perspective from Sarah, Ocean Conservancy. I want to hear it from like the legal and the conversation in between there with the policy, and then Teresa, you can close off on behalf of JET locally. Is there really an alternative to producing so much plastic?
Thank you for that question, Rushcam. So to be honest with you, I think it depends on how the plastic's being used. Ocean Conservancy is in the camp of, there are a lot of uses where plastic is key. It helps save lives in the medical field. It's needed for, I think Danielle mentioned in the policy talk about, food safety and hygiene there, and it's helped curb a lot of hunger in a number of countries across the globe. And so there are good applications for plastic. So we don't think that it will ever go away, I guess, to answer your question, but we do feel that the innovation and the technology is there. The policies are there to help us eliminate the plastic that isn't as necessary, right? Some of us might need more plastic in our lives than others, those with disabilities or other cases. But for the most part, many of us can do without a lot of the plastic that we've just come to know in our cultures and just the influx of it around us in the stores every day. So we feel like there's a lot that can be done to curb it, and that there are alternatives for a lot of those consumer items, but it'll always be there in some way, shape, or form where we really need it and where it can save lives.
Love that answer. It's realistic, pragmatic, and it makes sense. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. Danielle, what's your POV?
Yeah, well, following on what Sarah said, looking at the uses of plastic, I think what we're trying to address are those single-use plastics that end up in the waste stream, causing the marine litter problem. And so what I think needs to happen is having the appropriate policies and legislation to target those types of problematic plastics, the bottles, and as we are doing the styrofoam and other things. So that's where I think the attention needs to be placed. It's not on banning every type of plastic completely, but focusing on those few ones that are really causing the problem.
Thank you. Excellent perspective. So for those who are listening, who came probably to this webinar with like, them people you know how we use no plastic, Jesus, the wheelchair, not enough have no plastic, we not sit down on a chair, we not no. It's a different conversation that we're having. And Teresa, your thoughts as we close.
Okay, so just to add to what we've heard already, plastic has become very integral in our lives. For those who don't really know, plastic is made from fossil fuel. So it's also not, in its creation, in its generation, it's fossil fuel, which is adding to our climate crisis. So one thing that's important to note. So where we can eliminate it, I think it's important. Maybe about 50 or 60 years ago, plastic really just kind of exploded as a convenience. Plastic is cheaper, it is lighter to move. If you remember, well, I wouldn't remember, this is before my time, but glass bottles, for example, in terms of milk, where people, you'd get your fresh milk, you'd use your milk, you'd put it back, they'd collect your milk, and so that constant. Now you just buy a container, throw it in the garbage. So things have really evolved because we're people who really love convenience. And if you think about the plastic that you see, especially what is a single-use plastic, it's out of convenience. Do we need it? No. Are there alternatives? Sure. But until they become cheaper, until it becomes cheaper, then it's still, plastic will still be prevalent in everything. So I think key to all of this is recognizing all of that, but innovation is very important. I mean, they're exploring things like algae as an alternative to plastic. Algae, who would have thought? As you spoke about sugarcane, I saw where they were exploring this bottle where when you finish drinking water, you eat the bottle. I don't know. I mean, that's interesting. But the point is that we are a people that we are innovative. And I'm not just talking about Jamaicans. I'm just talking in general. We're innovative. We're always looking at the next best thing. And we need to apply that creativity and interest and in this area, because we recognize that plastic has allowed us to go forward in certain things. We recognize that we've been able to advance because of some of these conveniences, but we also have to understand the downside of things. To every pro there is always a con. And once we understand this, we can better, progress as a people. It's definitely a problem in our marine space. And so we need to be looking at how can we change? How can we create alternatives and focus on that, not just on the problem, but we need to be focusing on the solution.
Absolutely. Agreed. And you see, the convenience, our lives are not one-dimensional, right? So when I think about convenience, I think that I can live a life that has convenience, but still carry a water bottle, for example. Or there can be a cultural shift in some of the things that we do in our homes. I have friends who used to buy cases upon cases of water, just to have at home, whereas you could just get the refillable and so it's so many different things, and we have to look at our lives as the 360. So where our lives touch on different points, how can we make different changes until the innovation and creativity comes to kind of meet us with the convenience, So I agree. And it's been very enlightening. And thank you so much, panelists. Round of applause for our panelists. Yay! Yeah. I don't see you guys clapping yourselves. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you so much to our panelists. And thank you for everyone for joining us today for the International Coastal Cleanup webinar, A Bag A Bokkle. Now you know why it's called A Bag A Bokkle, because we had a bag upon bags upon bags upon bags of buckles. And, we have the data, and with the data, we are going to see what we're able to do. Yes, you might not be able to change policy right away, but you can change the things that you do in your household. Yes, maybe you're not able to own a big business and recycle and print all these things and do all these things and come up with these innovative, creative things. But there are just so many micro changes that can be made in our lives, down to the cups that you use, the straws, and it is within reach. It is possible. And so I want to encourage you as host and as somebody who has been working with JET for such a long time to make those little changes in your life, because it can make a very big difference in our environment. Special thank you to the Tourism Enhancement Fund and the Ocean Conservancy for their support of JET and ICC over the years. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to the brilliant Sarah from Ocean Conservancy, Danielle from GOFLAW, Teresa from JET. Thank you to Lauren, who also presented, and thank you so much to the dedicated volunteers who have given their time, their effort to ICC over the years, the event would not be possible without you. The plastic cannot pick up itself. And so we look forward to your participation and support in 2022. Hopefully this year we can be outside in our broad hat, our sneakers, our sunscreen, and pick up and keep the island clean. But you can keep the island clean every day in everything that you do. Lastly, thank you to Jet. You have held on to the mandate even in the midst of a global pandemic and unprecedented times. And the challenges that come with COVID have been great, but you've overcome them. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And thank you again to everybody for joining. We will see you this year at International Coastal Cleanup. Bye.